Oh, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at module 66. Let me kind of scroll over here, which is about, basically it's about oligopoly outside of game theory, and it's talking about how do they behave in the real world. So there's kind of some interesting stuff in this module. I would encourage kind of you just read through it. It's kind of a neat module to read because it talks about how companies actually behave. And for this first question, it's saying, for each of the following scenarios, is this evidence that there's tacit collusion in the industry? And tacit collusion is the idea that basically they're behind the scenes, they're making decisions that allow them to set a relatively high price, but they're not formally colluding and setting a cartel, right? So that's kind of what these are talking about, is that they're using behaviors that allow them to set high prices. So the first one says, for many years, the price in the industry has changed infrequently. All the firms charge the same price. The largest firm has a catalog with the suggested price. And so that is, yes, evidence. And that's because you have a price leader and they're avoiding price competition, right? So think about that really this question is tacit collusion is like, are you avoiding price competition? That's really what this is. So part B says there's been considerable variation in the market shares of the firms over time. That's an actual piece of evidence that they are not avoiding price competition. So no, because they are competing, right? That's what's driving the changes in the market share. And so somehow they're competing in that sense, in terms of they're doing something competitively. C says firms in the industry build into their products unnecessary features that make it hard for consumers to switch. That's not evidence of tacit collusion. It might be skeezy, but it's not tacit collusion. And that's just product differentiation. And often product differentiation can contribute to an environment where they can tacitly collude. But it's not necessarily the same thing, right? So there's a distinction here. Product differentiation is like advertising, or also features and things like that make their high switching costs. It creates an environment where they can tacitly collude, but they typically aren't. That's not just evidence prima facie for collusion. D says firms meet yearly to discuss their sales forecast. That's more of clearly they're not competing, right? So that's evidence they aren't going to compete, right? If they basically meet together and they say, well, Bob, you think you're going to have 40 million units. We think we're going to have 25 million. Okay, that's how many you think you're going to produce, right? And then they're like, yeah, wink and a nod. That's how many you produce. This is how many I produce. We're not going to mess around. That's them not competing, right? So that's kind of what that is. E, firms tend to adjust their prices upward at the same time. That's basically the same piece of them avoiding price competition. Yes, it's evidence they're avoiding price competition. So again, it's more like if you have some kind of an agreement to avoid competing on price, to undercutting everybody. If you have some kind of agreement where you're like, this is how many we're going to produce and this is how many you're going to produce, right? That's more like what we're talking about when we say tacit collusion. Advertising and product differentiation can create an environment to lead to that, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Okay, let's take a look at some multiple choice questions here. Having which of the following makes it easier for oligopolies to coordinate on raising prices? So a large number of firms actually makes it harder. Differentiated products actually can make it slightly easier to do it, as we were just talking about. Buyers with bargaining power makes it harder, because if the buyers can negotiate and twist your arm and say, you're not going to charge those high prices, then it makes it harder. Identical perceptions of fairness, that actually makes it easier as well, we would say. If they have the same perception, like if I think what's fair is what you think is fair, then that's also true. Complex pricing schemes actually makes it harder for them to do that. So differentiated products is kind of a weak true statement. I think it makes it easier, but it's really also more like it doesn't matter in the minds of customers. Like from the perspective of the customer, if the products are really differentiated, then they don't really need to coordinate on raising prices. They could raise the price and say, our product is so much better than their product. So differentiated products can go either way. I'm going to go with D, identical perceptions of fairness, because if that's true and it's like, I don't want to cheat and you don't want to cheat on our little tacit agreement, and I'm not going to undercut you and you're not going to undercut me, then that's really probably the best option here. So D. Number two, Which of the following led to the passage of the first antitrust laws? This is not going to appear on exams or quizzes. Any kind of history questions like this are not really part of it. The correct answer is the growth of the railroads and the emergence of Standard Oil, 1 and 2 only, D. Number 3, when was the first federal legal legislation, against cartels passed? That was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. C. Number 4, which of the following industries has been prosecuted? Again, this is not going to be appearing on the exam, but all of those have. The lysine industry, the art auction house, electrical equipment, bulk vitamins, all of them have. There have been multiple prosecutions over the years in these things. Oligopolists engage in tacit collusion in order to, and really the goal here is raise their prices, right? They want to behave like monopolists and keep the price high above their marginal cost. And so A. B says increase output. That would be the opposite. And share profits. They don't want to share. They want to maximize their own profits. They don't care. I mean, when you collude, you're not increasing your market share. You're trying to keep it stable. So A is the correct answer for that one. Number 2 on the free response, explain. Nope, sorry. This is an interesting question. I would say is about higher education. Many of you might be interested in that. And oligopolies exist in higher ed as well. List 4 factors that make it difficult for firms to form a cartel. Explain each. Oh, man. All right. So I'm going to scroll back up and just show you where you can find these. So they are listed here. Large numbers, complex products and pricing schemes, differences in interests, and bargaining power. So I'll just write those. Large number of firms. And hopefully by this point, you know that if there's too many firms, then they can't really collude. If they're complex, pricing is the other one, complex pricing. And this is the idea that like, it's really hard if you have 10,000 products to try to coordinate the pricing scheme of like, oh, okay, you're going to raise your price by 12% on that product. And there's 10,000 other products. It's not worth it at that point, right? Differences in interests, that's the idea that, that basically sometimes a firm might actually care more about market share than they would care about like the initial profit or something. And they might also have differences in terms of fairness. So, you know, quantity being a concern, like quantity of the market being a concern more than profit, or fairness, like what is fair might be a difference that would make it harder. You know, if one company is like, we're not going to do that, then it makes it hard to collude. Bargaining power of buyers is the 4th one. And that's the idea that if your buyers are able to basically exert leverage, a lot of times, you know, there might be only 1 or 2 buyers in the market for this product as well. Like lysine is an animal feed additive. There's thousands of buyers for it. But you know, if we're talking about like aircraft manufacturing, there's really only 2 aircraft manufacturers, but there's really only like a couple dozen companies and governments that buy aircraft in large numbers. And so if the buyers can actually negotiate and they have just as much market power, then it can make it very difficult for the cartel to form. Okay, so like I said, I think this is an interesting module just to read through it. But if you don't have time, hopefully this helped you. I'll see you next time.